You moved overseas for your partner, and now you're second guessing yourself in ways that don't even make sense. Not in the obvious, dramatic way, but in the tiny moments that shouldn't matter. Somehow they do. You pause before you speak, you replay conversations afterwards, and you feel yourself really shrinking by half a step just to avoid getting it wrong. And then it hits you, usually when you're alone. I don't feel like myself here. If this is you, this video is for you. Because most of the time, your confidence hasn't disappeared, it's just stopped being reinforced in the way that it used to be. When clients come to me at this stage, they don't always describe it as a confidence issue straight away, because it doesn't initially feel like that. It tends to show up in a more indirect way when they're noticing changes in how they move through situations rather than naming it as confidence. They'll say things like, they feel a bit off, or they're overthinking things more than usual, or that they don't quite trust themselves in the same way. And it's only as we stay with it for a little bit longer that it becomes clearer that what they're actually experiencing is confidence. There's a subtle shift in how they relate to themselves. They start questioning decisions that they would have made much easier before. Or they become more aware of how they're coming across in conversations, which often means that they hold back slightly in moments where they would have responded without thinking too much about it. And what makes this particularly confusing is there isn't a clear reason. Nothing has obviously gone wrong. So the mind tries to explain it. Why am I here? What's changed in me? I'm Hannah, and I work with people who've moved abroad for a relationship and find themselves in this phase where the move itself is done, life is technically settled, and yet internally there's this growing sense of self-doubt that doesn't quite add up. And what I see in a lot of clients is that they assume this must mean something about them, that they've lost confidence or become less capable or changed in some fundamental way. But when we slow things down and really look at what's happening, it tends to point to something much more specific. I'm thinking of a client as I say this because her experience captures this in a very everyday, recognizable way. She had moved overseas for a partner's job. She could actually speak the language as well. And before the move, she was someone who felt very steady in herself. She was used to making decisions, managing people, handling situations without needing to second guess every step. And then she arrived in this new environment and nothing dramatic happened, but she started noticing these small shifts in how she felt. She described it as feeling slightly out of sync with herself. And the example she gave me stayed with me. Something really simple. It was about ordering a coffee. She said she went up to the counter and for a moment she just felt unsure. Not because she didn't know what she wanted, but because everything around the interaction just felt slightly unfamiliar. The language, the tone, the way things were done. And it made her hesitate in a way that she wouldn't have before. Nothing went wrong, nothing noticeable happened. But afterwards, she kept thinking about the interaction. Like, why did that feel like that? Why did I pause today? And it wasn't really about the coffee. It was one of the many small moments where she just felt a bit less certain, a bit more aware of herself, a bit more cautious than she used to be. And when these moments repeat quietly over time, they begin to form a pattern. Nothing dramatic, not something you'd necessarily walk or into a room and start talking to people about, but enough that it changes how you see yourself. And that's usually the point where the meaning starts to shift into something more personal. I've lost my confidence. But if you stay with what's actually happening in these moments and look at the pattern a bit more closely, it's not that confidence has disappeared. It's that the environment you're in is no longer reinforcing in the same way it used to. Because confidence, in the way most people experience it day to day, isn't something that exists independently of everything else. It's something that constantly is being shaped through interactions, through familiarity, through repetition, through those small, almost invisible moments where things go more or less the way that you expect them to. And over time, you build this quiet sense that you know how to move through your world. When that's in place, you don't spend too much time thinking about confidence. You just act. You say things. You respond to things. You make decisions. And they land in a way that feels coherent enough that you don't question yourself too much. But when you move, particularly overseas, and for a partner, a lot of these reinforcing conditions, they shift all at once. You're in a new environment, often with different social cues, sometimes a different language or a way of communicating. And even when things are going well, there's still this underlying layer of unfamiliarity. So the same actions don't always produce in the same internal response that you might have. You might say something and then wonder how it comes across. Or you might make a decision and feel less certain about it than you would have before. Not because the decision is worse, but because the feedback that you're getting or receiving is less clear. And when that happens repeatedly, even in a very small way, your brain starts to notice that inconsistency. Not consciously necessarily, but enough that it changes how safe or steady things feel to you. And without these steady reinforcing signals, it becomes much harder to maintain that underlying sense of, I know what I'm doing here. So when you start to feel less confident in this environment, it's not that something inside of you has broken or disappeared. It's that the feedback loops that you used to have that supported your confidence are no longer as stable or consistent as they used to be before. And when you look at it this way, the experience starts to make much more sense, because instead of seeing each moment of hesitation or second guessing as evidence that something is wrong with you, you can begin to see it as a response to where you are. You're operating in a context where things don't feel fully known, where the signals you're used to reading aren't always clear, and where your sense of yourself isn't being reflected back to you in the same way. And of course, that's going to affect how confident you feel. So the shift here isn't about trying to force confidence back in. It's more about recognizing that what you're experiencing is a change in reinforcement, not the loss of ability. And that distinction matters because one of those interpretations puts pressure on you to fix yourself, while the other allows for the fact that you're still adjusting to a completely different set of conditions. So something to just sit with. If your confidence hasn't actually gone anywhere, but is just not being reinforced in the way that it used to be, how does that change the way that you see those moments where you feel so unsure? So if you've moved overseas for your partner and feel like your confidence has dropped, it's not that you've lost it forever. You've lost the signals that used to build it, and you're still adjusting to what replaces them. If this resonated, do continue to the next video. We separate your sense of self from what you're producing.